Okay, and welcome to another little tutorial here. We're going to talk about slope ratio today. So where we will start is water to cement ratio. So when we're talking about concrete, we can do a water to cement ratio, and that is the comparable number from between water and cement in a mixture. So let's just say that we had, let's say that we had 45 pounds of water and we had 100 pounds of cement. We would have a water to cement ratio. We take the water to cement, so water divided by cement would give us a 0.45 ratio. So now that we have a 0.45 ratio, that's simply water to cement, water divided by cement, we can take that number and we have something now to multiply against any amount of cement that we have in a mixture. Let's say that we have 200 pounds of cement. We multiply that by 0.45, and the amount of water that we will need for this cement is 95 pounds. So now we just created a ratio just between two numbers. Okay, so let's go ahead and just erase some of this. And now we're going to jump onto using a ratio, once again, to compare two different numbers. In this case, let's use a slope of a roof, and let's call this a 150-250 pitch, because that works for us for this example. All right, so now let's get a ratio between these two numbers. We're using a unit of run of 250, which is our standard unit of run for metric, and we're using a unit of rise of 150. So let's say we wanted to create a ratio. What number could we use against any run that we're given to figure out how tall the total rise is compared to that number? So let's get a rise to run ratio. So we'll go 150 divided by 250. 150 divided by 250, as I use my calculator, is 0.6. So now we have a 0.6 ratio. That is the ratio between these two numbers. So now let's say we are given a run of 2.4 meters. How much is the rise on that particular rafter? Well, we take the 2.4 and we simply multiply that by 0.6, our ratio. So we'll multiply that and it gives us 1.44 meters. So now we've developed a ratio between these two numbers. Okay, we're going to take this one step. Let's just take this one step further now. Let's just kind of get rid of some of this. Now we're going to do what's called our slope ratio. So we want to find out, given our unit of run and our unit of rise, we want to first find out what the hypotenuse is, or this is the unit line length, for this particular triangle. So we'll go ahead and do that math as soon as I get my calculator kind of figured out here. So we'll basically get the square root of 150 plus 250 squared, and it'll give us the hypotenuse. So how we do it in our calculator is square root, open bracket, 150 squared plus 250 squared equals the hypotenuse. And in this case, the hypotenuse will be 291.5476 and change. Okay, so now that we have our unit line length, what we're going to do is we're going to get a ratio between the unit line length and the unit run. And this will give us a ratio or a number that we can multiply against any unit of run to get the line length of that particular rafter. So let's go ahead and take the unit line length, 291.5476. We'll divide that by 250. That gives us a slope ratio for our common rafter of 1.1662. Excellent. So now we have this fantastic number we can multiply against any unit of run, and it will give us the line length of that item. So let's go ahead and do an example for that. Now we are given a particular span for a roof, and we know that the run of our common rafter, here's our first common rafter right here, the run of that common rafter will be half of our span. So in this particular case, the run of this rafter is 3.4 meters. So now we can find out the line length, the hypotenuse from here to here of that particular rafter by taking the run 3.4 multiplied by 1.1662. It gives us a line length. So the line length of that rafter is 3.9651 meters. Okay, so that's actually quite useful. So let's do this now. We'll get rid of that. Now we're going to calculate a couple more useful items here. This is our slope ratio for our common. So now we're going to set up and we're going to work through the slope ratio for our hip. Okay, now we'll calculate our slope ratio for our hip. So what we need to do is we have to first calculate the unit of run for our hip. And we already know that the constant unit of run for our hip is 353.6. And the unit of run will be the same as our common rafter, which is 150. So now we'll find the hypotenuse for that there. So we'll go, I'm doing this in my calculator right now, but it's square root, open bracket, 353.6 squared plus 150 squared, close bracket, enter. We have a line length, a unit line length for our hip of 384.1. Okay, great. So now what we want to do with our slope ratio hip is we want to find the ratio between the line length, the unit line length of the hip, and the unit run of the common rafter. So we want to be able to use the same run of common to calculate the line length of our hip. So we'll take that unit of line length for our hip of 384.1, and we will divide that by the unit of run common, which is 250. That gives us a slope ratio for our hip of 1.5364. Okay, let's take that 1.5364 and we'll multiply that by the run of our common rafter, which we've already discovered, of course, is 3.4. So we'll multiply that by slope ratio hip, and that will give us the line length of our hip rafter from here all the way down to here. The line length of that. Okay, so we have a 1.5364. We'll multiply that by 3.4, and that gives us a line length of our hip of 5.2237 meters. So we use the same unit of run to calculate the line length of our hip or the line length of our common rafter. Okay, we're going to go ahead and set up with a different screen and use this to calculate the difference in our jacks. Okay, now we're starting off with our spacing. What we want to calculate now is our difference in jacks. So really what our difference in jacks ends up being is simply a hypotenuse of a run of 600 millimeters. We have a 600 millimeter on center spacing. So when we're traveling down our hip from our first common rafter, when we our spacing of 600 millimeters over is exactly 600 millimeters off of the run of our common rafter. So what we can do here is we can use 600. We can use 600 with our slope ratio common to determine for every spacing how much do we remove off the line length of our common rafter. We call this difference in jacks. So our difference in jacks, we'll simply take our 600 millimeters, I'm doing this in my calculator, 600 times our slope ratio common, which is 1.1662, gives us a difference in jacks of 699.72. So now, when we are doing all these, I should have mentioned that when we calculate the slope ratio common, we should be storing that in location A on our calculator. When we do our slope ratio hip, we should store that in location B on our calculator. And when we store or we calculate difference in jacks, which is 699.72, we should store that answer in location C. That way we can recall that information very quick, and it makes pretty quick work of our worksheets. Okay, so now every jack from our first common, when we go to our first hip jack, we know that hip jack is exactly a spacing of 600, which means we can just take the line length of common and subtract 1 times our difference in jacks. So we take our line length of common, we subtract essentially 1 difference in jacks, which is 699.72. That gives us the line length of our first jack rafter. Now, one thing to keep in mind is now we've taken our 600 on center, and we're now using that as a full unit. So 1 unit of spacing means that we decrease our line length of our common rafter by 699.72 for 1 space. So if by chance we had a rafter that started right here, so this was a portion of a space, and let's say the portion of that space was a 0.5. It was 0.5 of a space. Well, we know that would be 300 millimeters, but let's just call it by a portion of a space. So from here to here was only a 0.5 of a space. Well, now we take 0.5 and multiply that by our difference in jacks, and that will actually give us the amount of line length that would be decreased for this portion right here. So however much we go over in portions of a space, we can multiply by our difference in jacks, or whatever we travel over in distance, in millimeters, we can multiply that by our slope ratio common, which will also give us how much is subtracted off that amount. Okay, that is it for our slope ratio lesson. We will carry this on now in one of our rafter worksheets. Have a great day.